Heroes, icons, mentors and legends of Terry Venables. Terry's personal heroes and mentors. It's universally acknowledged that Terry Venables had the most astute football brain in the land. Over more than 40 years he has accumulated an unbeatable level of experience, and this account is his spectacular personal tribute to the individual who have fueled his passion for the beautiful game. Who were Terry's childhood idols? Who were his mentors during his early years in the game? Who were the greatest players he ever played with or managed? What was the greatest team he was involved with? Who does he consider the greatest manager? Always an intelligent, forward-thinking individual during his playing career, Terry Venables took to club management like a natural, enjoying considerable success with Crystal Palace, Queen's Park Rangers, Barcelona, Tottenham Hotspur, and then of course England. Who could forget Euro 1996? Gordon Williams, broadening my horizons. Terry first met Gordon when he was at Chelsea. Agents were just beginning to come into the game at this time, so only very few people had representation. Gordon is on the near post at QPR's Loftus Road around 1971. Gordon was working for one of these agencies. He used to write articles for books for some of the players, such as Bobby Moore and Dennis Law. He would be paid something like £25 or £50 an article. Gordon would say to the players, "Look, why don't you do this yourself and keep all the money?" Invariably, they told him they would prefer him to do it. Terry was writing articles called "The Jokes the Fans Don't Hear About." Gordon said to him, "Tell, you don't need me to help, do it yourself and keep all the money." "What a good idea," said Terry. Terry bought himself a pale blue typewriter, a brother, and learned to type using 2 fingers, just like Gordon. I owe Gordon such a lot. Next, Terry wrote a story about Sammy Small, a Londoner who went to live in Newcastle, where a group of villains got their hooks into him, and he ended up a criminal. His prose wasn't great, but he had a good ear for dialogue. Gordon chuckled when he read it for the first time. Terry then wrote another short story, and Gordon said, "Why don't we write a book together?" However, soon after, Gordon moved to Dartmoor with his wife. One day, while he was away from home, a prisoner escaped from the nearby jail. Gordon was worried about the safety of his wife in the house on her own. What lengths would she go to protect her home? The result was a novel called The Siege of Trench's Farm. Gordon wrote it in 10 days and had it published under a pseudonym. That was turned into the 1971 film Straw Dogs, starring Dustin Hoffman and Susan George, directed by Sam Peckinpah. Gordon earned a small fortune. Gordon came back to London, and during a game at Loftus Road, Terry went to take a throw-in when Gordon shouted, "What do you think about writing that book together?" So after the game, they came up with a title. They used to play on grass. A story about a maternity ward getting mixed up and handing the wrong child to 2 mothers. A tear-jerking story, but unfortunately it didn't work. So they came up with Hazel. It worked. Suddenly doors opened to another way of life. Bobby Keach, larger than life. Photo shows Bobby tackling George Best in the match Fulham versus Man United in March 1964. The phrase "larger than life" was invented with Bobby in mind. He was Tell's great friend, a friend in the true sense, backing you up, advising you, always ready to stand at your shoulder when you needed someone you could trust. Tale had his problems at Tottenham with Alan Sugar and his pals were making life hell for him, there wasn't a day when Bobby wasn't on the phone. Have a drink, a meal, and drag Tale back to life. Bobby was at home with everybody, politicians, royalty, well-known celebrities, or people who didn't have two pennies to rub together. He was a friend you were always happy to see. Life was exciting with Bobby. They first met when they were kids training at West Ham. He was a decent player, no better than that. In a hard era and played for Fulham with Johnny Haynes, who adored him, and against the likes of Dennis Law. Bob didn't take football too seriously, causing havoc at training with little scams the Fulham managers, Vic Buckingham and Bill Dodgin, never knew about or chose to ignore. Bob played for West Ham United as an amateur from 57 to 59, Fulham from 59 to 66, and Queen's Park Rangers from 66 to 68. Bob was a leader. He was the Sergeant Bilko. He and another mate, Ronnie Belton, used to stand outside Buckingham Palace when they were young, taking photographs of American tourists. It wasn't proved if there was any film in the camera, Tell suspected not, but he pictured them later with a tousled old parrot showing no perceptible signs of life sitting on Ronnie's shoulder. Bobby told Terry that the parrot moved only once in all that time they had it, and that was to pull a wart he thought was a peanut off the side of an American tourist's face. Bob and Terry had dinner together on the Friday after England were beaten by Germany in the Euro 96 semi-final. It was Terry's last game in charge. Bobby Keach died the next day, aged 54. He left his friends with lots of happy and wonderful memories. Dave Coney, my first idol. Dave Coney lived in the same street as Venables, who was brought up in Dagenham, East London, moving to Bonham Road when he was young. Dave can be seen leading out non-league Bedford Town in 1964. Terry said they were lucky that nobody had a car and they played football in the street every day. His nan and granddad lived in Valence Avenue, which ran parallel to Bonham Road. Tell thought it was an ideal childhood. The great obstacle for kids today is that they have much less outdoor space to play in. They spend much more time in their bedrooms, watching television or playing computer games. The vital element to Terry was playing with other kids, interacting with them, learning to give and take, to be part of a team. The people who played in the street were Dickie Walker, who was captain of West Ham in the 40s and 50s, then became a scout for Spurs. Les Allen and his brothers lived in the house opposite Venables. Les played for Chelsea, Tottenham and QPR. Dagenham, a hot spot of talent. Younger brother Les Allen was Dennis, who played for Charlton, Reading and Bournemouth. Ken Brown, who lived locally, played almost 400 games for West Ham, from 52 to 66. Although not part of their street games, Jimmy Greaves, Bobby Moore and Martin Peters lived in the area as well. But Dave Coney made a big impact on Tell. He had a great sense of humour. Terry was sure he would become a professional footballer. He captained the Spurs youth team and looked destined for great things. But he never signed for Spurs. Tell never found out why, but he was told that Dave's wish was to go into the family plastering business. Terry would play on the same side as Dave in all the street games. It was great practice for him, as the other boys were much older, being all about 14. Terry was 11. The experience helped him enormously, and he found it much easier making the transition to playing in school matches alongside long-time pals Ron Hanley and Peter Auger. A great many footballers came out of that one street in Dagenham, a strongly working class area. They didn't have much, but they didn't lack for anything. Tell was delighted when Dave's son Dean went on to become a professional with Norwich and QPR. But Dave was Terry's idol. He stood out from the crowd. At that time in his life, Dave was exactly what Terry wanted to be. Ken Jones, doyen of sports writers. Ken Jones comes from a long line of footballers. His family could be called a football aristocracy. On either side of the war, from 1919 to 1970, the Jones family could claim an unbroken 51 years, during which at least one of its members was a league footballer. Ken's father, Emlyn, played for Merthyr Town, Southend United and Everton. He had 4 brothers, one of them, Bryn, an inside forward, was transferred from Wolves to Arsenal in 1938 for a record fee of £14,000 to replace the legendary Alex James, who had just retired. Another of Ken's uncles, Ivor, played for Swansea and West Bromwich. Ivor's son, Cliff Jones, was a vital part of Tottenham's double side of 61. The photo shows Ken interviewing one of the greats of soccer, Pelé, in Santos, Brazil, in 1974. Cliff Jones was one of Wales's finest players, winning 59 caps and scoring 16 goals. His grandson is presently on Tottenham's books. Ken himself played for Southend United, Gravesend and Northfleet, Swansea Town and Hereford United, and obtained his coaching badges. A terrible accident. Terry's relationship with Ken was helped by the fact that his mother was from Wales. In fact, Venables was evacuated to Wales during the war. They have been friends ever since. Any problem, he would call Ken for advice, and if Ken needed an opinion on something, he would contact Tel. A few years ago, Ken had a terrible accident. He was going to a Christmas party where he expected to have a drink, so he planned to return by train. As he arrived at the station, his train was pulling away, and he fell between the carriages and onto the rails. His arm was severed. Ken had always been something of a hypochondriac, a bit of a worrier. Terry went to visit him in hospital the next day, and he was absolutely amazed to find him laughing and joking with friends. And when Terry asked how he was, he said, "Fine, absolutely fine." And he's never changed to this day, enjoying life to the full, now writing for The Independent, and he plays a mean game of one-handed golf. Terry and Ken meet up for drinks and lunch, and they are always on the phone to each other. Terry has great admiration for Ken and his sports writing. He's invariably fair, and he's never had to compromise his principles to get to the top. He's got there through sheer ability and a wonderful knowledge of the game of football. Dick Foss, superb at nurturing talent. Dick Foss was a pre-war wing-half at Stamford Bridge and, like many others of his era, the war took away Dick's best playing years. During the hostilities, he turned out frequently for Chelsea, making more than 200 appearances. These included 2 Wembley finals in the South League Cup, which Chelsea won in 44-45. Dick played only sporadically after the war and retired in 1947, aged 35. A few years later, he was appointed the club's youth team manager by Chelsea's new manager, Ted Drake. By the time Terry got to work with Dick, the man was a legend. He had a knack of teaching young players the game's skills. Chelsea won the FA Youth Cup 2 years in a row, in 1960 and 61, beating Preston North End and Everton. Shortly after, Chelsea were relegated from the First Division, and a few members of the youth team found themselves promoted. Doherty, a petty individual. Dick was very loyal. Just after Venables left to go to Spurs, Dick spoke very well about him at a function that was attended by Chelsea's manager, Tommy Doherty. Dick was sacked soon after, and Venables thought it was because Dick supported him, even though he had fallen out with Doherty and requested a move. Tell thought Chelsea as a club was petty to get rid of a man who had dedicated so much of his career to bringing through talented individuals who would go on making a crucial contribution to the first team. For example, Jimmy Greaves, Barry Bridges, Bobby Tamlin, Ron and Alan Harris, Peter Bonetti, John Hollins and Peter Braybrook, and many other well-known stars. Doherty was disliked by many. In fact, it's difficult to name any player who was at Chelsea at that time who wasn't indebted to Dick Foss. He was the master of all he surveyed, and Venables believes he was also a key figure in the general development of the game after the war, helping to bring football into the modern era. A key ingredient to Dick's teaching methods was the ability to make football a joy to participate in, and an atmosphere in which he created a fantastically fertile atmosphere in which boys wanted to play every day. Dick Foss is one of the people who Venables and the rest of the youth players at Chelsea respected and trusted. They all greatly respected him. Jimmy Thompson, crazy dedication. They don't make them like Jimmy anymore, and while those who came under his spell will probably say thank heavens, they will also be the first to say how much they owe him. Jimmy Thompson had a profound effect on a lot of youngsters like Terry Venables and Jimmy Greaves, who dreamed of being professional footballers. The photograph shows Jimmy Greaves and is seen chatting with Jimmy Thompson, who was also known as Mr. Pope. He's best described as an English eccentric. He was certainly outrageous, and I don't think he would object to that description. He was a Chelsea scout in the East End of London and convinced Terry Venables to sign for Chelsea. Mad as a March hare. Venables thought he was mad as a March hare when he first met him. His behaviour and the way he dressed was certainly different to anything he had experienced before, but Jimmy took a genuine interest in the future of the youngsters, and they grew to trust him. Terry was laid up after damaging an ankle badly enough to keep him out of a London schoolboy trial, and Jimmy would have none of it, as he turned up with a miracle balm in a bottle, explaining in a whisper that it was so secret it was banned. Only top professionals can get hold of it, he said, with a wink. After this, you'll be back on your feet playing. Jimmy took off his trilby, an event in itself, rolled up his sleeves and massaged Terry's foot for 2 solid hours, during which time it turned black. Right, get a ball, take it into the back garden and try kicking it, and put everything into the shot. Terry did as he was told and fainted with the pain. He was taken to hospital where the doctors diagnosed his injury as a broken bone in the foot and that Jimmy had been massaging. Jimmy surrounded you with crazy warmth. He was kind, funny and mad, and Terry said he would never forget it. Cliff Lloyd, dedicated to progress. After a modest playing career spanning either side of the war, Cliff Lloyd became Secretary of the Players' Union, the Professional Footballers Association. In 1953, he dedicated his career to achieving progress for professional footballers. The photo shows Cliff on the right with Jimmy Hill in 1961. Cliff was a great character who was admired and loved throughout the country. He was a real fighter and won many battles with the football hierarchy. Virtually all the benefits enjoyed by players today can be attributed to Cliff Lloyd, working closely with the PFA chairman, Jimmy Hill. Cliff was a key figure in forcing the removal of the unfair maximum wage. Johnny Haynes went on to become the first £100 a week player. Cliff was a storyteller. Terry Venables worked on the PFA committee at this time, also being the PFA's vice chairman, and he remembers how he used to make Cliff laugh. He would make him cry. His eyes would go red and Cliff would take out a handkerchief to stop crying. Cliff was a wonderful storyteller. One story illustrates the attitude of the era he played in. Money was so tight that all the players' bootlaces would be collected after a game, washed and then given out before the next game. Cliff twisted his ankle badly just 15 minutes into a game. He was carried off the pitch and laid on a table in the dressing room, and just as he was being put down on the table, the crowd roared, so the two men who were stretcher bearers rushed outside to see what was happening. They forgot all about Cliff. His ankle was swelling by the second. He was in agony. 30 minutes later the whistle blew. Half time. The team were 1-0 down. The manager paced around the table, giving the players a stern talking to. Nobody took any notice of Cliff. They disappeared for the second half. At the end of the game, Cliff's mates were quiet because they'd lost. Finally Cliff said, "Is there only any chance of someone taking my boot off?" But his ankle was so swollen he couldn't get the knots in the laces undone. Cliff said to the physio, "Just cut the laces." Cut the laces, permission was needed. That was the cue for the physio to ask the manager, "How are we off for laces?" Obviously the laces had the edge in importance over players in those days. All modern day players owe Cliff an enormous debt. As well as breaking the maximum wage and achieving freedom of contract for players, he set up education funding to enable youngsters to gain qualifications to secure their futures outside the game. Cliff also instigated accident funds for players who were forced to retire following injury, and he set up a benevolent fund so that players can be cared for in their old age, ensuring that players are able to receive medical treatment and financial aid after they finish playing. Cliff Lloyd sadly died in January 2000, but he handed down a fantastic legacy to modern players. Cliff was a quiet man. He was loved by all those who worked with him. Danny Blanchflower, self-belief in abundance. Danny Blanchflower never looked like a footballer. He resembled a member of the aristocracy or an accountant. He seemed different from the other players. They all looked as if they had a tough life and a tough time of it getting to the top. But Danny gave the impression that he had just stepped out of university. In fact, he was a graduate of St Andrews University. Terry said, "Blanchflower was always my hero at Spurs, along with Johnny Brooks and Dave Mackay. He was an inspirational leader and also one of the finest footballers ever to wear the famous white shirt. He combined graceful movements with remarkable skill. His game was about subtlety and speed of thought, about awareness and perception that allowed interception before confrontation, although he defended well when the occasion demanded. His best pass was hit from the right side of midfield, lofted 35 yards into the inside left position. It posed a constant threat to the opposition. He wasn't particularly fast. His intelligence was ample compensation. It was thought to be impossible. Danny embodied the finest principles of sportsmanship within his own doctrine and how things should be done. He had a noble air. He was also a great thinker about the game, both on and off the field. A marvellous character whose humour will live on forever at White Hart Lane. A great many fans still remember Danny's remarkable skills. In his case, it is impossible to exaggerate. He was really as good as all the legends would have us believe. Photo is the Venables verdict. With Danny at the helm, in '61 Spurs were the first team in the 20th century to win the league and FA Cup double, an achievement that was previously thought impossible. The following year, Ipswich and Burnley edged them out of the title race in a season which, at one stage, looked like it might bring the treble of League, FA Cup and European Cup. In the end, the club had to settle for just the FA Cup and third place in the league. The 1962-63 season brought second place in the league, behind Everton and the European Cup Winners' Cup. It was a golden era for Tottenham. Danny was nominally the club's captain, but he enjoyed significantly more influence over the team than is normally the case. He was virtually the manager on the field. Bill Nicholson allowed Danny his free run so that his undoubted leadership qualities could be exploited fully. Danny was a journalist. Danny did not achieve major international honours, but he was very proud to be Northern Irish and led his team to the 1958 World Cup finals, where they reached the quarter-final stage, an outstanding achievement which owed much to his leadership and inspirational qualities. His original club, Glentoran, are immensely proud of their former player. In the Football League centenary season in 1998 and 99, a committee of football historians selected Danny as one of the 100 most influential players in English football. Two more former Glentoran players, Jimmy McIlroy of Burnley and Peter Doherty, Man City, Derby County and Huddersfield Town, were also included. By the time Venables started in management, Danny's playing career had ended, but he used to write a column in the Sunday Express, which Terry found refreshingly thoughtful. Danny was a man apart. Danny would often interview Terry and they would sit and chat. Venables always found him fascinating to listen to and great company. Danny was one of life's teachers. Over the years, Terry Venables learned the skills of management. Blanchflower was definitely one of the men who influenced Terry as he embarked on his managerial career. Danny made you think you could achieve anything. If you knew that you were faced with Danny Blanchflower on the opposing team, you really had something to worry about. The passing and skill of that Spurs team was the best Terry ever played against. The captain had 10 men with him who were convinced they could beat you. Danny was a very private man and hated any intrusion into his privacy. For example, take the filming of Danny's episode of This Is Your Life. In those days, it was filmed live. Bill Nicholson and all the players were gathered in a television studio watching Eamon Andrews approach Danny. He said, "Danny Blanchflower, this is your life." When Danny spun round and said, "No, it's not," before stalking off. The This Is Your Life team were mortified. Soon after this, they started pre-recording the programme. Danny was the first person to refuse to go on the show. If he was around today, he would detest the media's obsession into the private lives of sports stars. He was simply brought up in a very different era. Venables remembers a genius. Danny was a realist, and he knew the time had come to retire. When in the 63-64 season, he was upstaged at Old Trafford by a young upstart by the name of Dennis Law, who gave Spurs defence the runaround, the Scotsman scoring a hat-trick in a 4-1 hammering for Spurs. The photo shows the coin toss for the 1962 FA Cup final. That was that. At the end of the season, Danny called it a day. He had the sense to retire when he was still regarded as a great footballer. Judging when to hang up your boots is always difficult, always a temptation for another season. But fans soon forget the great moments when they see a player struggling. Terry remembers reading John Fennelly's obituary of Danny that was published in the Tottenham Matchday programme. It was perfect. Those too young to remember Danny should listen to and believe the tales about the great man, because exaggeration is impossible when the subject is the genius of the great Danny Blanchflower. Cliff Jones, underrated speedster. As a player, Cliff Jones was everything you wouldn't expect from just looking at him. Bewilderingly fast, and for a player below average height, 5'6", often devastating in the air. Cliff was a key member of the great Tottenham double side of the 60s, right up there with the likes of Danny Blanchflower and Dave Mackay. Yet for a man who achieved so much, I think it's fair to say he was underrated, though not by Spurs fans, in his native country or by those who saw him destroy defenders with consummate ease. Terry says Cliff in full fright was quite an experience. When I say he was quick, I mean very, very quick. Either side he would be past you with the same sort of pace as the flyer from Real Madrid, Ento. He could have been an Olympic sprinter, and for a smallish man, he could outjump the tallest defender. In the air, he was simply fantastic. Cliff comes not so much from a football family as a football dynasty. His father was one of 5 brothers, all of whom played league football. Indeed, they can claim to have had at least one of their number registered in the league for over 50 years. Night in jail. Cliff Jones cost Tottenham a record £35,000 from Swansea Town, a huge amount of money at the time. Cliff will agree that his greatest moment was scoring a hat-trick for Spurs when they overwhelmed Gornick to Breeze at White Hart Lane 8-1. The aggregate score was 10-5. The first leg in Gornick was dreadful. They had a nightmare journey to Poland, stayed in a flea-ridden hotel. Cliff and Geoffrey Green, the football correspondent of the time, had a difference of opinion with the overzealous local police and were jailed, but very briefly. The result, a 4-2 defeat in front of 70,000 raucous fans. Game played in an intimidating atmosphere. The 8-1 home defeat of Gornick was played in front of an intimidating crowd, which numbered 57,000, who were thrilled to see their team go through to the next round, 10-5 on aggregate, with goals from Danny Blanchflower, Cliff Jones 3, John White, Bobby Smith 2 and Terry Dyson. This raucous and intimidating crowd also let the Poles know exactly what they thought of them for the way in which Tottenham Hotspur had been treated 2 weeks earlier in Poland. Cliff retired in December 2000 after over 20 years as a teacher of physical education at Highbury Grove School, but the name of Jones in football may live on as his grandson was playing for one of Spurs' junior sides. The England captain Bobby Moore always regarded Cliff as the most difficult of players to play against when crosses came in. Jimmy Hill, a man for all seasons. Jimmy is included in Terry's book of heroes, not as a footballer, but as a man for all season. He's one of those people who just exudes confidence and non-stop enthusiasm. He was a good, though not outstanding player as an inside forward, but self-assurance took him to the top. Venables recalls one incident that summed it all up. Jimmy was playing with Fulham at the time. They were not playing very well, so the crowd started booing a particular player. So Jimmy went up to Johnny Haynes and said that the crowd's reaction wasn't right, and it certainly wouldn't be good for the players' morale. He never dreamed for one moment that the supporters were booing him. Typical Jimmy. His level of confidence made him a better player. Self-belief gets you everywhere, and it certainly did in Jimmy's case. Not short of self-belief. Jimmy is best known as a television personality, but his areas of interest are far wider than that. He originally planned to be a stockbroker, but National Service in 1946 forced a change of career. He hoped his talent as a boys' brigade cornet player would get him into the regimental band, but the band leader was not impressed with Jimmy, but then he was the great Johnny Danforth. In the army, he was in a side with 9 professionals, and that pointed him in another direction. After playing with Folkestone Town in the Kent League, he approached Ted Drake, manager of Reading, but Ted turned him down. However, Brentford took him on in 1949. He played 3 seasons there with Ron Greenwood. In 1951, he joined Fulham, who were just about to be relegated from the First Division. He remained at Fulham for the rest of his career, teaming up with the legendary Johnny Haynes. Jimmy was never afraid to express his views. During a game, he was constantly giving vocal advice to George Cohen, who was ignoring the bulk of Jimmy's advice, when from the stands came a voice using a mock Jewish accent. "Cohen, Cohen, give the ball to the bloody rabbi when he tells you." Needless to say, this caused much amusement, not least to Jimmy's mum and dad, who were sat in the stands. His finest hour. Venables tells a tale. I have a nice story about Jimmy when we played a charity match in Ireland. It was the English veterans against an Irish team. After the game, we went to the function in a grand room with an Irish female entertainer who asked for 3 assistants. She chose Jimmy Hill, Jimmy Greaves and myself, helping her to sing Old MacDonald. Venables would be the dog, Greaves the cow and Hill the duck. Jimmy was upset and said he wanted to be the dog, as he did a great dog. Whatever Jimmy did, he wanted to be the best at it. His finest hour came in '61. With Cliff Lloyd, he was instrumental in the removal of the maximum wage. Later, the same Lloyd-Hill team negotiated with the Ministry of Labour for the right of freedom of contract for the players. Jimmy can be seen shaking hands with Joe Richards, chairman of the FA, with the despicable Alan Hardacre behind him. Cameo role as a linesman. Jimmy brilliantly represented George Easton in a famous test case at the High Court after Newcastle United refused to allow the player to join Arsenal at the end of his contract. Even though they refused to allow Easton to play for them, Ernie Clay financed Easton while he was not getting his wages. The so-called slave contract was abolished. Modern players who are earning a fortune and have the right of freedom of movement between clubs have much to thank Jimmy Hill and Cliff Lloyd for. Back then, when a player signed for a club, he stayed for life. Photo shows Jimmy Hill as a standing linesman at Highbury in September 1972. Arsenal were playing Liverpool in in September 72, and Jimmy was commentating. A linesman tore a leg muscle. The call went out for a replacement. Jimmy had got the necessary refereeing qualifications. He passed the microphone to a colleague before emerging onto the pitch. He handled the job like everything else in his life, with consummate efficiency. The Venables verdict: after becoming manager of Coventry when he retired from playing, Jimmy then became chairman in 1975, but not before he stunned them by resigning to become head of sport at London Weekend Television. He revolutionised televised football with the Sunday afternoon programme, The Big Match. He returned to his first love, Fulham, as chairman for 10 years, from 1987, guiding the club through choppy waters before Mohammed Al-Fayed took over the reins. Dave Sexton, a great teacher. Dave Sexton has rightly earned a reputation as one of England's finest coaches. He is another product of the Academy of Football, from which have graduated such free thinkers as Frank O'Farrell, Noel Cantwell, Malcolm Allison, Tommy Docherty and John Barnum, who were destined to become managers and influence the English game. Terry first met Dave at Chelsea. He provided the missing piece of the jigsaw and started to bring the best out of Venables. All the youth players joined in, and football became all about new strategies and tactics. Dave liked to joke and was very easygoing until you upset him. Then he had a real temper. Peter Osgood upset him once, so Dave offered him outside to fight it out. Osgood said, "I'm not that stupid. Your dad's a champion heavyweight boxer." Between 81 and 84, Dave was the manager of England's under-21 side, and Venables was the coach, winning the European Championship in 82, beating a very strong Germany in the final. A great coach. In coaching, what is important is that everyone understands the message. It's pointless having the top 3 brains out of the squad of 20 understanding what you have said when the rest haven't taken it on board. A good teacher makes sure the whole class understands. One thing about Dave Sexton, he had no patience with journalists, apart from men like Ken Jones, who kept his comments about the game to himself. Dave would have preferred not being a manager, but there wasn't any money in just being a coach. And he got the perfect job when he worked alongside the former England manager, Sven-Göran Eriksson. Terry Venables always had a great admiration for Dave Sexton and all that he achieved in football. Dave Mackay, the tough tackling buccaneer. Dave Mackay was the archetypal hard man. He was immensely strong and possessed an inbuilt will to win. Both Dave and Danny Blanchflower were in the Tottenham team that secured the double in 60-61. But whereas Blanchflower always looked so graceful and in control, Mackay was a buccaneer, always crashing into tackles. It should never be forgotten though that Dave was also a very skillful player. Terry says, "I remember Dave well from my Spurs days. When I went to White Hart Lane, I guess I was the governor of the team in the sense that I often dictated play. Dave was not getting any younger. On my first day, we had a 6-a-side game in the ball court. It was a right old roughhouse. If you got caught in a corner, Dave would just fly at you and crush you against the wall. It was his way of testing you out. The first time I went past him, Dave punched me right in the Niagara Falls. Ouch. I crumpled in a heap on the floor. The second time I did it, a fight ensued and the other players separated us. After training, we all went to a small pub. We got talking and we've been firm friends ever since. A great mystery. It's always a mystery to Venables why Mackay only won 22 Scottish Caps. It seemed as though the selectors deliberately went for home-based players, probably as a deterrent to prevent their star players earning their living in England. Of course, what the selectors ended up doing was shooting themselves in the foot, because they needed their high-caliber players, but they were biased. Dave had the most amazing skills at his disposal at Spurs. Eddie Bailey, first team coach under Bill Nicholson and the Spurs legend in his own right, used to give the players various exercises to perform during training, one of which was to hit the ball between coloured lines 20 feet away in the gymnasium. As the ball came back to him, he would repeat the process. He did this 40 times. His teammates would be astonished. Dave would then say, "Do you mean like this, Eddie?" Dave was a star before he came to Tottenham. It's rare for any Scottish team to eclipse the old firm of Rangers and Celtic. But Dave was instrumental in helping his hometown club, Heart of Midlothian, to do that in 57-58. Hearts won the Scottish League, the Scottish Cup in 56 and the Scottish League Cup in 54-55 and 58-59. He was also Scottish Football of the Year in 58. That is quite an achievement. Dave's contribution to the famous 60-61 double at Spurs was gigantic. His absolute control over the crucial midfield area gave Danny Blanchflower a free rein to release Tottenham's superb forwards. He scored 115 league goals, winning 31 of their 42 games. Dave was very athletic. The photo shows Dave leaping over his teammates at training. From left to right, there are Cliff Jones, Ron Henry and Jimmy Greaves. Dave's 61 FA Cup winners' medal made him a rarity in that he was a league and cup winner both north and south of the border. He also played in the triumphant FA Cup sides of 62 and 67. However, he missed Spurs' historic 63 European Cup Winners' Cup triumph in Rotterdam through injury. Spurs beat Atletico Madrid 5-1 to claim English football's first ever European trophy. The night before the 67 FA Cup final, Bill Nicholson took the team to the West End to see a film which put everyone in the right mood for the combat ahead. Pastors knew. The next morning, Terry and Dave took a stroll down Piccadilly in the sunshine. They talked about the game ahead, and Terry never forgot just how super confident Dave sounded. There were absolutely no doubts in his mind that he was going to lift the trophy. The photo shows Alan Murray kissing Dave with a happy Venables looking on. The Scotsman enjoyed some remarkable success in England, but it was also in England that he experienced his worst defeat. In April 61, the old enemy thumped Scotland 9-3 at Wembley. Dave's teammate Bobby Smith scored twice, and Jimmy Greaves, soon to be his teammate, helped himself to a hat-trick. When asked if he played in that game, Dave said, "I was there, but I didn't play." In 1968, Dave's career was rejuvenated. Believing at 34 Dave was past his best, Tottenham allowed Derby County's manager Brian Clough to take him to the East Midlands. Clough was bringing together a good young team at the baseball ground, and he thought Mackay's qualities in defence would be just what his youngsters needed. Back to Derby. Clough's judgment was right. Dave led Derby out of the second division in 1968-69 season as champions. As captain, Mackay made the difference, and Dave is seen shaking Clough's hand. Sadly, Dave missed out on the big party at Derby when Clough's side won the First Division Championship for the first time in their history in 71-72. By this time, he'd moved to Swindon Town as player manager. He returned to Derby after Clough and Taylor resigned and were in disarray. Dave was managing Nottingham Forest, who let him go, realising his heart was still at Derby County. Summing up Mackay. When Terry Venables was a young captain of Chelsea and Tottenham's double team were on the way, he remembers running onto the pitch at White Hart Lane to warm up before playing Spurs. Dave Mackay shouted at him, "Venables, have a kick of this ball. It's the only kick you're going to get once the game starts." That summed up Dave Mackay, and he would obviously see into the future because his prediction was spot on. He was a superbly talented, aggressive guy. He was also a lot of fun and a great joker. Terry loved a laugh and a joke, and Dave was always full of fun, on and off the pitch. They had a great time together at Tottenham, which Terry remembered for the rest of his life.